Now, welcome. It is an honor to be together tonight. And like Jane said, thank you all for coming. This is an important night for all of us. This is an important conversation we're going to have. And so, you're seekers. I'm sure many of us are followers of Jesus, but I know that not all of us are. And so that's great. Glad that you're here. Again, glad that you're looking to learn. We've got some great testimonies, there's some stories. But I want to just kick us off just with a little bit of just a biblical perspective. Again, because for those of you who are followers of Jesus, right, that colors the way we think about this issue of immigration. Right? And I think, again, tonight's important because so often this is a hot topic, right? And it's very inflammatory. And so often we hear anything about immigration, whatever the source, right? So often I think our thinking first goes to blue or red, or left or right? That's kind of the first lens through which we look at things. But I think if you're a follower of Jesus, or even if you're someone who thinks highly of Jesus, like he was a good guy and appreciate his teachings and all that, right? I think there's a sense in which that lens, while important, and there's important conversations to have at that level, that really isn't where we need to start as followers of Jesus, right? We're called to look at things from God's perspective first. Right? We're called to look at things from the way he sees this topic. And I think that's important because, right, we're told in Scripture that we are his ambassadors. Right? We're the ones that are representing him to an onlooking world, both the strangers among us and those who are not, right? Everyone's looking at us like, well, you claim to follow Jesus. How are you acting? How are you living? And so we want to carry his heart into this topic. We want to carry his heart into the way we act, the way we respond, and that means, that we want to know what his heart is, and that's how we become salt and light, right? Jesus said, if you know the New Testament, one of the first passages of the New Testament is this thing called the Sermon on the Mount. Jesus said, "You are the salt of the earth. You are the light of the world." That's a purpose statement. That's an identity statement, right? Like that's your role as my followers. You need to be salt and light. And how do we do that? Well, we carry the heart of the Father into the world. And thankfully, God has revealed himself. He isn't someone who's mysterious or tries to hide the ball. He's very clear. His heart for the stranger, his heart for the alien among us, he makes it crystal clear. And there's a number of places we could turn, but some of the most obvious are in what's known as the Old Testament, some of the first books of Scripture, where some of God's earliest revelations of himself to his people, when he had called the nation of Israel out of Egypt, and he was revealing himself to them, he was in a relationship with them, he said in a couple of places, and I'll just quote one of them here, he said, look, here's how I think about the strangers among you. He says, look, I defend the cause of the fatherless. So he cares about orphans. I defend the cause of the widows. So, single parents, he's after them. And then in that same breath, he says, and I love the foreigner that's residing among you. That's his heart. This is his words. This is not left or right. This is not blue or red, right? This is God the Father. He says, so, since you're my people, you are to love those who are foreigners. If you're my people, this is how you're to respond. You're to look at them, you're to move toward them, treat them in love, because that's my heart for them, because you yourself were once foreigners in the land of Egypt. And we'll come back to that later, but that's the heart of the Father. Notice he says he loves them, he cares for them. He doesn't make it a mystery. It's not like, well, I like some, I don't like others, or he doesn't break them up into classes, right? The good ones I'm for, the bad ones I'm like, which is, again, notice at the worldly level, there always come news cycles, they're always coming at us. It's coming at us at that level. You got to break them down, categorize them. Some are good, some are bad. God says, no, I don't. If you're my kids, if you're my followers, you don't get to think that way. Your first lens has to be my heart, which is carry a heart of love toward them. Love them as yourself. He says, because, and he finishes with this. He says, because I am the Lord, your God. And that's such a beautiful, powerful statement. And there's a couple ways you can read that, but one of the ways is, look, he identifies himself with us. I'm your God. That's how I call myself. I'm with you. I've identified myself with you. That's pretty powerful, right? Like, wait, what? But then he also says, but I'm the Lord, your God. Like I want you to walk with me. I want you to, since we're united like that, since that's who you are, since you belong to me and I belong to you, then I want you to walk with me. I want you to walk like me. You need to carry my heart into the world. My heart is to love the stranger that's among you. That's our baseline. That's kind of the overarching theme. Again, we're going to hear stories tonight. We're going to hear about the system. We're going to hear how things are working, things are not. We're going to hear about challenges. We have all kinds of stories to share tonight, which are going to be awesome. But if you're a follower of Jesus, or if you are curious, you think, well, what would Jesus do if he were here? How would he, navigate San Diego and the immigration situation today? His first leaning would be to love them, to show them love. So let me stop with that and give it back to Jane.
Can you guys hear me? Okay. I'm just going to do a brief overview of the U.S. immigration system. Lance, are you able to change the slide? Okay. Okay. And then the next one after that. Yeah. Okay. So immigration law is one of the most complex fields of law. And what I hear is it's second to tax law. So sounds like a lot of fun. So obviously, there's no way for me to provide an adequate overview of the immigration system. And we're going to actually be hosting a deeper dive into U.S. history, into immigration, and what Scripture says. So if you're interested in being a part of that event, you can sign up. Actually, after the event, we'll have like a sign up in the foyer, okay? But immigration obviously has played a crucial role in shaping the fabric of our country. And we're a nation that is made up predominantly of immigrants, whether it was forced or was voluntary. And at some point, an ancestor in your family line made that decision, or they were forced to make that decision, or they were forced out of their land, unless, of course, you're indigenous to this land. But the immigration system is essentially the government's process and structure to regulate foreign national entry, stay, and citizenship. So every country has a system that they've created. And this is our country's system and structure that we put in place, okay? So there are 4 primary pathways. It's the diversity lottery, so countries that are underrepresented. Family sponsorship, so that's like sponsoring your mother or your kid or your spouse. It's employment sponsorship, and there are various types of employment sponsorship. And then there's humanitarian, and so that's kind of World Reliefs, so that's where we work, okay? So that looks like refugees and asylum seekers, in addition to an array of others. So throughout the course of U.S. history, immigration policy has changed, and it's changed often, and it's changed for a variety of reasons, and I'm not going to be able to go into all the details. But I wanted to highlight some really significant immigration policies. So prior to 1924, really, it was open borders, okay? And basically, America was encouraging immigration to settle U.S. lands. And then in 1924, the Immigration Act of 1924 basically created a quota system. And it was based upon countries of origin. And then in 1965, the Immigration Nationality Act was passed, and this replaced the quota system. And it basically favored family reunification and skilled immigrants. And then in 1980, the Refugee Act was passed. So this established a system to process, admit, and resettle refugees. So this was in response to the Vietnam War. And so for those of you that are from this area, you may remember actually in the 70s when Camp Pendleton was a refugee camp. And kind of like when Kabul fell and Afghans were coming and they were put on military bases. So it was very similar to that. So Camp Pendleton housed 100,000 refugees from Southeast Asia. And that is actually when World Relief started our office in Orange County. And it was local churches that were actively resettling Vietnamese and Cambodian refugees. They were finding apartments for them, they were looking for jobs, they were enrolling kids in school, they were taking people to medical appointments, and it was the local church that was doing that. And it has been the local church, in season and out of season. And so We've seen this in the short amount of time that I've been with World Relief. I saw this when Kabul fell. And for those of you that are in East County, you remember, and even, we had to resettle people in other areas of San Diego County, but it was local churches that were really actively looking for furniture. They were enrolling kids in school, taking people to medical appointments. And we saw this as Ukrainians were coming through the border in the aftermath of their invasion of Ukraine. And we found time and time again, it has been the local church. And this is a really important part of the history of the church's response over the years. And so I'm excited for you guys to now hear a little bit about what's taking place now and see opportunities for the local church now in response. So I'm going to invite John to come back up, and then I'm going to introduce each of the panelists. So I'm going to invite Vivian first. Vivian is a senior appellate court attorney at the California Court of Appeal. Before joining the court, Vivian worked for the U.S. Department of Justice as an assistant U.S. attorney prosecuting border crimes in San Diego and antitrust crimes in Chicago. From 2018 to 2019, she served as an assistant attorney general in the Consumer Fraud Bureau of the Illinois Attorney General's Office. She clerked for a federal judge in the Northern District of Illinois from 2014 to 2018. And before clerking, she was an associate at a large law firm. She is a graduate of Northwestern University and New York University School of Law. She's a mother of 2 daughters, and her family attends Redeemer Presbyterian Church in Encinitas. She currently sits on the board of directors for Hope for San Diego, Generate Hope, and the Afghan Refugee Empowerment Fund. And she also has served as a host home for a few asylum seekers, actually. So, welcome, Vivian. Yay. And then I'm going to invite Caroline to join us. So Caroline Matthews is a supervising attorney at Pathways to Citizenship, and she began serving there as a volunteer. She passed the bar in 2012, and she practiced in transactional areas until 2022. Caroline started her work with Pathways to Citizenship in 2022 and became the supervising attorney last year. She had aspired to work for the UN, the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees, but actually became aware of opportunities to serve locally and serve the same people. Caroline and her husband and her son worship at Solana Beach Presbyterian, and she studied at UC Santa Barbara and went to law school at USD. And then finally, Christina Tong. She's an associate attorney at the law offices of Jane Oak, an immigration firm that has a presence in LA, San Diego, and San Jose. She specializes in naturalization, family-based immigration, humanitarian immigration, and removal defense. She attended Northwestern and completed the study in a law office or judge's chamber program with the State Bar of California. She speaks Mandarin and Spanish and English. And she and her husband attend church just down the street at Kairos Church. So we're going to transition to the panel now, but before I hand it off to John, I just want to note the QR code that's on the screen. We're going to be using this for the Q&A. So during the course of the panel, as questions come up, just use the QR code just to submit questions, okay? Thank you.
Thanks, Jane. Well, here now the good stuff, right? So excited to get this panel together. These dynamic ladies in front of you are obviously daily involved and have been for a while in this whole area of immigration in San Diego and have a lot of great information to share and stories to tell. So let's start with the beginning. And maybe, Christina, let's start with you with a question to all 3 of you. So just tell us a little bit about your story. How did you end up working in the field of immigration, and how did God call you to this?
Right. I wanted to be a doctor because that was the only job option available to me with my parents. And then healthcare really, really didn't work out, and I was kind of floundering and needed a job. My boss is a strong Bible-believing, Holy Spirit-filled Christian, And she'll tell you that the Holy Spirit is her HR director. And so she looked at me in my sorry state and said, hey, you should work in immigration law. So I started as a legal assistant, and around that time, our friend Kim Kardashian started her study in a law office program. And my roommate at the time said, hey, you should do that because it's cheap. So I got admitted to the California State Bar, did 4 years with my boss being my supervising attorney. I finished my 4 years in 2020 in the middle of COVID. I took the bar exam on a laptop. And moved down to San Diego because my boss is visionary like that. And she goes, hey, you should go to San Diego and build out a branch office there, having done 0 consultations in your life. So I came in 2021, met my husband down here, and am probably going to be here for the foreseeable future.
Awesome. Thanks, Christina. Carolyn, you went from practicing even a lawyer for a little bit longer, but you practiced privately and then found your way into this area of immigration. What was that like?
Well, for me, it's kind of an interesting, non-linear way that God worked through my story. So I had a background of being very interested in working, like Jane mentioned, with United Nations, with the High Commissioner of Refugee. That was something that I aspired to actually back in college. Got kind of a opportunity right out of college to go do that. Instead, I got into a really horrible car accident and ended up being in a coma and relearning to walk and talk and read and write. And so I was very disappointed. I was very angry at that time in my life about what God's plan was. Why did this happen? And after some rehabilitation, I decided to go on a journey. I'd already taken the LSAT to get into law school, but I thought, I'm not sure if this is the right thing for me to do. Had a lot of questions for God. So I spent a year traveling and teaching English throughout Central America and Asia. And when I came back from that, backpacking solo trip, working with people in poverty all over the world, and just seeing their hearts, I came back to this country and saw a lot of people in poverty and their hearts. So I did decide to go to law school. I kind of was on a totally unrelated path. I worked at more corporate businesses in-house counsel roles, et cetera. So, for example, when LG Electronics was still here, I was with them, and I helped a little bit with employment-based visas, but really no experience. And then one day I was sitting in church, and our pastors kind of brought to our awareness, like, what can we use? What's in our hand right now? Are we a nurse? Do we have a driver's license? Are we a friendly person? What characteristic do we have right now that we can use for the kingdom? And I was like, man, I am a lawyer. I wonder if that's helpful to anyone. And I found out about Pathways to Citizenship was actually at the church we had just started worshiping at, because we had just moved up to Solana Beach. And kind of started getting involved by doing asylum cases and volunteering, and then really seeing, like, it was quite literally something it was like a road to Emmaus. I did not even recognize it until I was writing out a brief for an asylum seeker, and I'm like, wait a minute, all this law is under UN High Commissioner. Like, I would have been doing this. This is so crazy. It's taken me 10 years to get back here, but here I am again. So I've really been so grateful for God's nonlinear plan for my life, and that I can come back to it in a place where I'm able to do this work now.
I love that because, like you said, just one day, right? Kind of like on the road to Emmaus, those crazy disciples. And who knows, today might be that day for some of us. Mm-hmm. You never know. Vivian, you started in New York, Chicago. All that Wendy said God blessed you and brought you to San Diego. But what's your journey to law and to immigration?
You know, the theme that I'm sensing, and I got chills a little bit because providence and the nonlinear pathway is a consistent theme, and it's the same for me. I moved here in 2020, 10 years out of law school, having never practiced criminal law. And then I became a frontline prosecutor prosecuting border crimes. And what's so interesting to me is that was not part of my plan. That was not how I anticipated being used. And yet we were moving here, and I was not barred in California, and there were only certain available options. And I applied for the job and didn't get it. And then they called me several months later, and said there's a need. And what I find really fascinating is that God takes unequipped people, puts them in situations that are different and uncomfortable, and reveals a lot of his character and mine in that process. And so I went to the office without really much insight or experience into what it was going to be like. What I did know was that I wanted to do the job ethically. I wanted to act justly and love mercy and walk humbly. And in those years that I spent in the office, I saw a lot and learned a lot about myself and about God's character.
Beautiful, I love that. And for those of you who may not be familiar with Scripture, what Vivian just quoted is one of these Old Testament prophets where God, through the prophet, said, God has shown you, O man and woman, what does he require of you? What does this God want? But to do justly, to love mercy, and to walk humbly with your God. Which is beautifully, again, a clear statement of our God and what he's looking for from us. So that's beautiful. Well, let's transition then from kind of how you all ended up working in this space of immigration, the border, and have experience in those things. Let's talk about, let's move it to the present. So what are you seeing now? Maybe let's start with you, Vivian. Let's work backwards. What is your practice like today? What are you seeing day to day, both in your practice, in your community, maybe even with families? I know you've got some experience with some refugee families, Vivian, and maybe you could share some of that.
Sure. So in my role as a federal prosecutor, I was really focusing all my attention on two categories of crimes. One was drug trafficking, and the other was what we call illegal entry or reentry. And to say that my docket was overflowing is an understatement. And that was true under both administrations that I served under. And so what's really interesting to me about what I do now is right now I work for a judge, so I work for the judiciary. I still work for the government, the state government. And in many ways, my client, but back then and now, is an institution, right? Which is a different kind of way of practicing law than when you're advocating for individual clients. When you represent an institution, your goals, the way you view the system, the way you view the rule of law is really different. Now, in my role more as an advocate in nonprofit spaces, the names of people, the faces of people, there's no getting away from that. There's a vulnerability in advocating for people bearing the image of God that is weightier, and it definitely has a different feel. The work that I was doing as a federal prosecutor was absolutely important, but I think that with the resources and the power and might of the federal government, sometimes your view of your mission really changes. However, when you're face to face with an individual, it's a much different quality of connection. And so I would say now, that and sometimes it's unpleasant. Sometimes it's really difficult, but it is for me now being able to work more directly in the advocacy space is a big shift in my mindset towards how the law impacts individual people.
Vivian, remind us, what are some of the ways that you're advocating now? Tell us about some of those organizations.
Yes, so one is out in the lobby, the Afghan Refugee Empowerment Fund. One of the really incredible byproducts of leaving my former job is connecting with people who do work directly with members of the community who are struggling, who need all manner of help and access to financial independence and education and economic empowerment. And so now I work with a former colleague of mine who is also here to create ways to just enable people to succeed and thrive, specifically in the Afghan refugee community. Through my same colleague, I was able to house a Pakistani Christian woman who was under serious threat against her safety because of work that she does against some of the most oppressive laws in Pakistan that disproportionately affect Christians, and so she needed a place to stay, and so we housed her for several months with my daughters, and that was very eye-opening for me as well, and that's something I don't think I would have had the opportunity to do otherwise.
And forgive me, Carolyn and Christina, but we can't leave this without, could you share with us, Vivian, so what's maybe one thing you took away from that, when you and your husband decided to house this refugee who was here, like what's something that you surprised you, that God showed you as part of that season?
It was challenging. I would love to say to everyone, you all should go do it because it's going to be easy and beautiful and lovely, and the reality is it's difficult. But what really struck me in that moment when I had the opportunity to say yes to it was God has removed all the barriers to saying yes in this moment. It's really just my personal discomfort. And if I cannot set that aside, then I don't really know who I am right now or what I believe. And God rewarded that openness. So it was not smooth sailing the entire time, but God honored my discomfort in that moment.
Vivian, thank you. That's beautiful.
Thank you.
Well, Carolyn, Pathways to Citizenship has been a vibrant ministry of Solana Beach Pres for a long time. Again, you started serving there. You're now the director. What's the work like? What has your experience been, and what's happening now?
Yeah, it's interesting that Vivian brought up the idea of this institutional client in the government, and I kind of feel like the first thing that came to my head is we're David, and I feel like each day I'm fighting Goliath, and it's really unbelievable with the limited resources of a nonprofit that's basically privately funded by people like you and small to medium-sized grants. We're doing incredible work because God is ultimately in charge, but it's really difficult. And what happened in our org is prior to 2025, we were not taking any removal defense cases. And as I saw a change in the policies and how it affected our clients who were in the affirmative space, which I'll say just in a second what that means, I just had this heart, the cavalry is not coming, right? So there's more work to do than there are individuals to do it. So just like Vivian said, it's been uncomfortable to step into a space that I hadn't previously practiced in, that I feel completely inadequate in, but to be honored through God's Holy Spirit and just say, I'm going to say yes, Lord, and you have to help me with this. I know you can do this. You're bigger. Give me my smooth stones to fight Goliath with. And it's day to day, it's been really heartbreaking and really, really difficult. And I've tried to treat each person we take on as my mother or my father. And that has a real toll on a human being, I'm realizing, because hopefully none of you have your mother or father getting detained and arrested by ICE every week. It's quite an exhausting, traumatic experience to go through with a family. We're still very much practicing affirmatively, which means people are applying and not in a court setting. But the stakes are just very high. The nerves are really high. And the emotional trauma, like Vivian mentioned, someone living with her, it's a very hard space. And again, to the other nonprofits Vivian mentioned, there's so much need. And I have to know that we're a small organization. We have 5 employees. So to be able to take on someone's legal case is really valuable, but they're a whole person, right? They have all these other needs, emotionally, spiritually, financially. And a lot of these people, because they feel so comfortable, they come to you with their traumas and their needs, and it can be very overwhelming. So as much as I very much relate to that discomfort, and sometimes I feel like, some other staff members will be like, you need to, don't worry about it. I'm like, yeah, but this is ultimately someone's life, right? This is their freedom. This is our Constitution in action. I take this very seriously. And it's like, for such a time as this, there's a lot of things happening right now that I think things will naturally ebb and flow, as you mentioned, depending. But just, it really is hard and heartbreaking sometimes to see these human beings, these people that are made in the image of God suffering, and how to step into that, how to have a boundary around what we can help with, ask for things we need of the community, whether that's funding or support. So it's day to day. It has been one of the most, I thought 2025 was crazy, and 2026 has not disappointed. I was saying in the office right now, there's never a dull moment, and it is certainly so.
Well, Carolyn, thank you. That's beautiful. And I wondered, forgive me, Christina, but one just to follow up for you, Carolyn. So you said that the clients, that the cases you're able to take on, you're able to help. Again, it's not just legal issues they have. It's not just detainer release and all this stuff, but they're the whole person. And I wonder if you comment, your experience on your year abroad, where you were traveling to different countries, different cultures, and how you found that you were looking for friendly faces and people that could help you navigate all the complexities, these other places. Did that prepare you in a way for what God has you doing now?
And I think that's also, I kind of left out the hopeful part. Like the good thing about my day-to-day is, like, I'm helping real people and their families, and I've never had people be more grateful in my entire life. I mean, just people are so desperate. And just even getting a call that's got no good news, just being called and seen and loved and known is so important. I think definitely for such a time as this, God has been preparing a whole protocol in my heart for these people. And I definitely think that was a time that I was very prepared. I wanted to mention one other thing is Pathways is very lucky sometimes in our limitations as a smaller organization. I would say I think almost every single detained case we've taken is actually a Christian person, which has been actually all sort of by accident. So God just has these ways of reminding us why we're doing the work. And I've had multiple clients that have been detained, and then when I go to do their bond motion to get them out of detention, seeing like, wow, they've been involved in a parish or a church for 20 years and just really done a lot of good in this world. So just to see the whole person, sometimes I have to fixate on like the legal issue, but it's been such a blessing to like get back to that whole person mentality of like, once they are out and the legal issue is solved, being part of people's families, being invited over for dinner, all those things. So yeah, I think that definitely was not by accident that I spent a year abroad.
Oh, that's beautiful. Christina, thank you for being patient as I do these follow-ups and draw out more. But so our disappointed doctor, how has it been? Has God called you to serve immigrants and their families? What is that like for you daily these days? And establishing a San Diego office, right? And just talk about that and what you're doing these days.
Totally agree with Vivian that God just kind of sends unequipped people into the world to do whatever He wants. I am an extremely strong introvert, and so the idea that coming down to San Diego required me to network a ton and like build business was terrifying. Magically it happened, but also kind of magically, the year that I came, I was sandwiched between two pretty big geopolitical events. There was the fall of Kabul, like Jane mentioned. So that was August of 2021. And then Russia invaded Ukraine in February 2022. So I came to San Diego right between those two things. And I really thought that having like a high school level intermediate Spanish was going to be a disadvantage. And it wasn't, because when Ukrainians began flooding the southern border, nobody spoke Ukrainian. And when Afghans started flooding the southern border, nobody spoke Dari or Pashto or Farsi. And so all of us at that point, I don't know if you know, there's a member of our county board of supervisors named Tara Lawson-Reamer, and she had secured a $5 million budget for the county of San Diego to be the second city in the nation to offer, through the Office of Assigned Counsel, free legal services, free legal representation to detained immigrants in San Diego County, which is super cool. And that opened up to private practitioners at exactly the same time that I moved to San Diego. So it really did feel like the Lord had set things up for me. Not that he moved geopolitics for me, that'd be very narcissistic, but he made it so that the timing was so great for me to begin to try practicing immigration law. And when I began, so I don't know if you remember Jane's like 4 ways that you can come to the US, but one of them is humanitarian, and then kind of subset of humanitarian is the only aspect of immigration law that gets litigated. So what all 3 of us do is we're in courtrooms all the time, which is not typical of an immigration attorney. Probably more typical in San Diego than, and in border towns than in most of the United States. But you know, the like sexy TV shows with like suits and like objection, Your Honor, like that's not the usual practice of an immigration attorney, because most of us do a lot of transactional stuff, right? Like Pathways does citizenship applications and green card applications. Our private firm does that too. But because of the municipal circumstances in San Diego, and then also just my circumstance of the timing of when I came, I jumped both feet first into litigation. And I think the challenge of litigation for me, and Caroline, you can give feedback, is that today, on the weekly, case law changes. So the thing when you're applying for like a green card or whatever is you're just going to go flip through this big all thick book and be like, well, this statute and this regulation says this person is eligible to get a green card. Those rules generally don't change very much. But when you're practicing litigation, what the Board of Immigration Appeals decides yesterday is going to affect your case that you're arguing today. And then you go up a level and you're doing like Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals stuff, what the federal district courts are doing right now, what SCOTUS does. Like all of us have to have our eyes constantly scanning for what new decision has come down, because that is going to impact the argument that you just spent 2 weeks crafting and now you got to like pivot. So never a dull moment is the correct assessment of that. So again, you know, imagine me, right? Never having gone to law school, never done the mock trial, never did externships, internships, whatever. And I'm like, what the heck is a legal brief? And now I gotta like write these things. And then you've got these immigration judges kind of like looking down on me from their high seats, being like, counsel, what's the relief that you're seeking? And I'm like, I don't know. Please be nice. But yeah, that's how it's been. Back to you.
Well, you didn't even have ChatGPT.
Back then.
Like, how are you going to get anything done?
So great now, though.
All of our problems are solved.
I love that, Christina. Thank you. And hopefully your parents are very proud.
Yes.
Thanks.
They should be.
She's only an attorney.
But that's a perfect segue to our next question. We'll shift gears here because, as you mentioned, and you alluded to this, Carolyn, right? Things are changing so rapidly. And again, haven't you all noticed, again, we're all more than teenagers here, so we've all experienced this, right? Just things are accelerating in the world, all across the board. Like just things are moving at such a pace. And we could talk theology about that, but we won't. We're here for immigration tonight. But I think that's true in this area of immigration law, immigration practice, and it's almost like on the weekly. Like, well, no, that's not the rule anymore. Now it works this way. Let's talk about that. What shifts in immigration policy have you guys observed? So let's get down to the nitty-gritty of your practice now. How are things moving from maybe not last week to this week, but maybe last year or the prior administration, right? There's been a big shift in emphasis, and I think one of the things, again, I'm a recovering attorney, so I've not practiced in this area, although as Jane said, our church has done a lot of work, and I oversee our global outreach, so I have worked a lot with refugee communities here and abroad, so it's an important area. But what it seems like, it strikes me that, the most recent change in law that Jane showed us was from 1980, right? So obviously our immigration system and our immigration structure hasn't changed significantly in terms of the framework in a long, long time. And yet, I think you guys can tell us there's a lot of room for molding and shaping it depending on right? Who's got the keys to the car? So maybe talk about what has changed, what have you observed, and how has that impacted your practice? How has it impacted our community? Maybe Carolyn, let you kick this off.
Okay. I think one of the things that's hard to wrap our head around, and Christina alluded to this, we think of laws as written down statutes, and they're followed in the same way throughout time, et cetera. And I think one of the things that's hard about the current climate is we're seeing that there's policy and protocols that are put in place in different various agencies. So I'm sure we'll get to this, but basically when people say affirmative immigration, they mean under USCIS, which stands for Citizenship and Immigration Service. So that's where people file green cards, naturalization for citizenship, those type of applications. You file for temporary protective status through that. Then you think of the courts, and those courts are Executive Office of Immigration Review. That's EIOR. I always get that mixed up in my head, but that's what it stands for. And that's where you're talking about the immigration court system. So a lot of the news we've seen in San Diego towards the middle of 2025 was people being taken at these immigration court appearances. Then, as we moved into the later part of 2025, we started seeing something that was unprecedented, which was them going to this affirmative process where where Christina's like talking about these statutory kind of, they're written down rules where ICE and in collaboration with CIS was taking immigrants who were at their affirmative interviews. So that was a pretty wild couple months. It was incredibly terrifying and traumatizing for, I think, many practitioners, myself included, and many non-citizens working through this system of legal, I think what is the right way to say it in colloquial terms, the legal pathway. So that was a pretty big shift. How did that happen? The law didn't change. Christina just told us it's written down, but the interpretation through policy changed. So what happened in those instances was there was a memo and an executive order put out saying, we want USCIS, starting in October, to be able to carry out enforcement priorities. That allowed previously affirmative officers, they talk about it, it's a non-adversarial interview when you go in for your green card, when you go in for your citizenship. It's kind of like a conversation confirming you're eligible for the benefit. Well, in October 2025, that shifted to that officer has enforcement priorities in mind and is able to, they actually started allowing them to carry weapons. I never saw anyone carry a weapon at San Diego, for the record, just so that we're factually accurate, but that was part of what was allowable. And then we started seeing in November our first arrests. So someone comes in, I just will give you a real example. My client went in, she's a mother of 3 US citizen children, never had any criminal record, Christian woman, been here raising her children. Any other time but the day she went in, would have gotten approved for her green card, left a couple weeks later in the mail, we would have gotten her green card and said, yay, celebrate. And then she's on her path to citizenship. To be eligible for that benefit, you have to, if there is, criminal contemplations, that they had to have entered with what we call an inspection and an admission. They had to have gone through a port of entry and talked with CBP, all the things you probably want to be happening. So she went for that interview, and instead, 4 ICE officers came in with masks, told us all to get out of the room, handcuffed her, took her down to the lobby, would not allow me to talk to her, no warrant, no explanation, nothing. Given nothing, took her downstairs. Daughter's crying, obviously. I'm traumatized. We watched the van pull away. She pulls into DHS downtown. There's an ICE facility downtown that's housed in the same building as the immigration courts. It's out on Front Street. Held her there in the basement where they have a staging area to hold people until they're transferring them to detention. No access allowed to attorneys. Gets 1 legal phone call, calls me. We discuss. I ask them what is she being held for? This doesn't make sense. I don't understand the basis. Please send me legal documents as to why this client's being detained. None are given. 3 days later, I hear from her, look, she's at Otay Mesa Detention Center, and she spent Thanksgiving in there. And I filed a habeas for her as this unfolded, went through the federal court system to get her out. And she was detained for 19 days. That means that was approximately $4,000 of taxpayer dollars to detain someone who should not have been detained, who has no criminal record, is eligible. And actually, we're about to get the approval on her green card this week. So that's exciting, but to just tell a real world example, this woman is someone you guys would have in your home. She would watch your children. You'd go out to lunch. She was such a wonderful woman, and just watching the trauma that was inflicted on this person for literally no reason. And when I asked outside USCIS, why is this happening? They said, there's a quota of 20 people we need to take a day. And that is just facts. That is real facts. That's not news propaganda. That happened to my client and other clients as well. But that's one illustration of a change. And I don't think anyone saw this coming. And so the legal community surrounded around these things, and I think that's one kind of implementation of policies that are being executed. Like a quota isn't part of, that's a policy decision, right? That's not something that's transparent that we knew about, right? We're just hearing about that through these memos that maybe are leaked through these agencies. So it's kind of a dramatic example, but I wouldn't say that's an isolated incident by any means. So that's, yeah.
Carolyn, thank you. Yeah, that's changes in policy that are dramatically, impacting the refugee community and those who are here. So, Christina, what have you observed?
I guess kind of more high level. Okay, so I'm gonna do a little bit of civics. Under the Department of Homeland Security, you have 3 general sub-agencies that we deal with. So that's USCIS, where you get your affirmative stuff, like Caroline was saying. Then you've got ICE, Immigration and Customs Enforcement. So that's going to be your kind of policing sub-agency. And then you've got Customs and Border Protection. So these are the people who ask you why you're here when you come back in from your trip to Venice. And then they also are hanging out at the southern border as well. Border Patrol is under CBP. When you don't have the U.S. government's permission to be here, i.e. you came in without inspection, or you don't have, or you overstayed your status, then DHS, so all these guys, DHS, they're gonna try to get you to leave forcibly. Now, under the 4th Amendment of the Constitution, you can't deprive anyone of life, liberty, or property without due process of the law. So what that means is DHS has to formally charge you and say, this is the chapter and verse of the Immigration and Nationality Act that you violated, and they take you to court. Court, like Caroline said, is, we call it EOIR, so it's EOIR, the Executive Office of Immigration Review. EOIR is under the Department of Justice. And the Department of Justice is supposed to be a neutral arbiter, right? So they're not supposed to have skin in the game. DHS is supposed to take you to court, and then they're supposed to decide between your client, our clients, and DHS, and whoever has the better argument is supposed to win. That's how it works. That's how it's supposed to work. So what we're experiencing is that departments of the government all fall under the executive branch. And I don't know if you heard the statistic, but in 2025, about 25% of our 700 or so immigration judges either were forced to resign or got fired. And what this has created is a system that is over-pressurized, right? So no one's trying to be a bad person, but because you have to work through right now, I think our crazy statistic is like there's close to 4 million pending cases before EOIR right now. It's just an untenable situation. You've got judges in San Diego who are hearing virtual cases all the way out in Arizona, all the way up in Central California, because there just aren't enough people who can hear these cases. So what this leads to is what feels like, to us, it feels like hasty decisions. And it feels like policies are being implemented to sort of just take care of broad swaths of people because they have to relieve the pressure on the system. It's just not a tenable situation. I don't know if you saw this news article. All of us saw it because it was like shared all over our listservs. There was there's this government attorneys, like U.S. attorneys, who like there's this one that said like she hated her job. Right? It was just a terrible, terrible situation. So Caroline mentioned habeas. So what we're also experiencing is it is a very legitimate desire of our federal government to increase national security. One of the ways they've chosen to do that is to vastly expand detention space, because detention is has become an enforcement priority. So what that means is a lot of our clients, instead of DHS taking our clients to court in a regular courthouse in downtown San Diego, our clients are generally sort of being pulled into immigration detention, and we have to fight their case while they're detained. Now, I don't know if you've ever been detained. I haven't, but when I talk to my clients who are detained, mental health deteriorates very quickly. They also, if they don't have somebody in the States who's going to advocate for them outside of detention, they have very limited access to documents. They can't tell you how to find the evidence that they need to prove their case. And so generally, I mean, nobody wants to be detained anyway, but for the sake of being able to take full advantage of the way our justice system is supposed to work, they're supposed to be afforded a full and fair hearing. And to do that, it's best if they get released. Because of different case law that has, so I don't know the numbers, but Merrick Garland, right, our previous Attorney General, he did very little to set precedent for different cases that are decided at the higher courts. That normally wouldn't be a problem, except for the fact that right now, our Attorney General, Pamela Bondi, she is setting a ton of precedent, right? I want to say like we're at what, 70 odd cases, maybe 100 some cases that she has pulled from like ancient history and like has now made precedent. And so these are now the rules. Every week when we hear that Ms. Bondi has set a new precedential case, we're reacting because it's shaping how the law is being interpreted in the courthouses that we go into. So what this means is because both of these departments, DHS and DOJ, have so much influence from the executive branch right now, and the executive branch has a very clear agenda to promote national security, but doing it in this kind of broad sweeping brushstrokes kind of way. We've had to go outside of both of these departments and try to seek release for our clients through federal court petitions. So essentially what that means is that Caroline and I are suing the federal government a lot. And so I think I was just so shocked the first time I filed like a writ of mandamus or a habeas petition, like I'm naming as my defendants like the Secretary of the Department, Pamela J. Bondi, Attorney General, we're like taking the federal government to court. Because essentially what we're arguing is that the Fourth Amendment isn't being respected. It's not being honored, right? So we're saying that the way that a client has been detained is unlawful. They're not being afforded due process. And right now, like federal defenders in San Diego has had to learn immigration law because all of us, yay, immigration attorneys, are flooding the federal court system with these habeas corpus petitions just to get our clients out, just to get them a full and fair hearing.
And actually, I'm just going to add this because I just talked to one of the U.S. attorneys who's like on the opposite side of us on a habeas. He said as of 2026, 64% of the cases filed in federal court are immigration habeas petitions. So that tells you the magnitude of this issue where you all live.
Well, and Carolyn and Christine, do you guys have any sense of, say, pre-2025, how many habeas you had filed? And how many you filed since then?
0? Yeah.
Zero
I
before?
think both of us are 0. I think just to
Had not sued the federal government before.
Yeah, my federal suing times have
Not so much
just
right
ramped
now.
up, yeah. Just wasn't planning on that. But I do think it's important, I think Jane might have said this, maybe it would be good to give like a quick, what does that mean, right, to get a habeas? If that's okay to go a little out of, just because I have attorneys ask me that all the time, like, what does that mean in this context? So habeas corpus, bring forth the body. You can use it in any sort of situation where someone is detained. So criminal courts, which is where our federal defenders used to be filing these, or immigration, because immigration detention is basically jail. Just to stop calling it something that it's not, it's jail. Your freedom is deprived. There's only certain times you can see your family members. There's only certain things you can do. You eat the food they want. You don't have access. I have a client right now who they won't, I guess I have to bring him his eyeglasses. His wife can't bring him them. So these type of situations are playing out in that context. So we go to the federal government and we say, basically, usually it's in the form of, to go back a step from the detention. How does someone get into detention? They're arrested, right? That someone has seized them. And so as Christina pointed out, ICE is the one with the authorization, historically and now, to carry out that function. So someone is eating their lunch in their car. Some people see them, they come up, they say, hey, do you have any papers? The person says, I don't have any papers, maybe something like that. And they say, get out of the vehicle, and the person's arrested and booked, detained at, let's say, Otay Mesa, which is where one of our detention facilities through California, closest to us. Then we come in as an attorney and go, wait a minute, you can't arrest someone without a warrant. And in limited circumstances, our immigration case law allows that, very limited circumstances. So most circumstances, that's not allowable. So we go in, and there's a couple of reasons you file a habeas in an immigration, but I'm talking about the most typical presentation is this. Someone's taken and whatnot, and then you're kind of arguing about, wait, the initial arrest that happened wasn't lawful. It's not, you obtain this detention through this illegal violation of the person's Fourth Amendment rights. So that's one way that we have to go and say, hey, federal court, can you help us negotiate this person's release from this illegal detention? Another way is because, and just to piggyback, you might have heard a lot about this, and it goes and dovetails with what Christina said. There's a priority on detaining people. Mandatory detention. We saw this start in 2025 with the Laken-Riley Act that kind of tried to expand who was subject to mandatory detention. We just saw it with the refugee community in Minneapolis. Shall be detained. They read the law that's already in place differently. Shall be detained, they read as anyone who's a refugee can be detained. So we're seeing, like, just to pull a few things, and we're just seeing a different implementation of things. So habeas helps us go and say, wait, this didn't happen in the proper process. It's against the United States Constitution, and or it's against the Administrative and Procedures Act, which says that organizations in our federal government have to follow their own rules. They have to follow a proper procedure that complies with our Constitution. So that is why there's 64% of the federal cases are immigration habeases right now, because that proper process isn't being followed.
Caroline, thank you. I told you guys this was going to be good information tonight. Vivian, you've been waiting a long time.
I know.
What are you seeing in shifts in terms of, just
Sure.
policy?
I have
direction?
the privilege of speaking to the law enforcement side of this, because you see the very tangible ways that current policies are burdening practitioners who are defending the rights of our immigrant neighbors. What is also really important to note is that our law enforcement agents and prosecutors are also struggling. And here's what I've seen in my own experience and in conversations with prosecutors who are practicing now. So in various times throughout various administrations, people have been given charging guidelines. So that means we don't take every case that comes in because we just don't have the resources or the time or the energy. And so one administration or executive branch will say, hey, we want you to focus on only defendants who have violent pasts, a violent criminal conviction. And prosecutors say, okay, as people come in, we prioritize our cases. We focus our attention and efforts on people who have aggravated violent felonies or violent felonies. There are also times when people say, well, we want to focus on repeat offenders. So we want you to, prosecutors and agents, we want you to focus on those who are arrested, who have multiple illegal reentries, and that's the name of the offense. It's part of the United States Code. And what has been a really dramatic change this time around is that essentially those guidelines are gone. And not only are they gone, as Caroline and Christina have mentioned, the emphasis now is on numbers. When that happens, it is about quantity over quality very often. And this is not to say that good faith people in law enforcement are not attempting to prioritize in some manner. However, one really notable change that we've seen is now my former office, the U.S. Attorney's Office, publishes a weekly press release that lists the number of charges brought, the number. So that tells you a little bit about the emphasis that the office is being directed to send its focus to. And I think what's really difficult is now when you have law enforcement agents and officers who have been trained to target segments of the community that maybe have violent past convictions or are involved in gang activity, they're no longer able to really focus time, resources, and attention and their training on those efforts. What ends up happening is you have this prosecutor in Minnesota who shows up in court and says, this job sucks. I think that's literally what she said. This job sucks, and I do not have the tools to do the job correctly. Because resources are strained, what you also have is you have detention centers filling up, and the conditions are harsh because there's only so much to go around. The trials, there are so many more trials happening. And now let me tell you, trials are incredibly resource intensive. You have the government, we stand up there and we say on behalf of the government, we call these 5 officers as witnesses. They spend their whole day and afternoon in court, testifying to try to help us get a conviction. We have fingerprint experts that are paid for at taxpayer expense. It is an enormous investment of resources for every single trial that is brought. And there are more and more trials that are happening because you have people with no criminal history who now think, I have nothing to lose by going to trial. I'm not going to settle or plead out my case. I'm going to fight this. And so then you have government attorneys and agents then having to show up in court to defend those cases, regardless of whether they want to be doing that or not. And I think the last thing I will say, well, two more things. One is that you have DEA agents, drug enforcement agency agents, you have ATF, they usually handle ammunitions and guns offenses. They are now working on immigration enforcement. They are trying to do their work, but that is also not, oftentimes what they signed up to do. And now you have people who maybe focus their investigation resources on organized crime and cartel work in Mexico that are having to have that work disrupted or put on hold so that they can be part of the internal immigration enforcement that is happening here. And so I want to represent that viewpoint, which is that law enforcement, you're also starting to see a lot of fatigue, a lot of exhaustion, a lot of frustration, because a lot of their priorities, they don't have the discretion anymore, right, to make those decisions about how they want to focus their energy and their passion for the rule of law as well. And the last thing I will say is what has not changed, and this is important. Drug trafficking, which was fully about half or more of my workload at the U.S. Attorney's Office, continues to be about how it was. And the reason for that is that the vast majority of defendants in drug trafficking cases are U.S. citizens. And that actually makes a lot of business sense for the drug traffickers and cartels in Mexico. They want to hire somebody to bring drugs across the border who has the ability to cross the border easily. And so what we saw is a lot of times, someone will have like a compartment in their car, or sometimes drugs are stored in gas tanks. People are paid $2,000, $3,000 a load. And I don't want to say 9 times out of 10, but something like that, because they're US citizens, they get through, they come back, no problem. So it continues to be the most efficient way to traffic drugs into the United States, is by taking desperate US citizens who need quick money. And if you think about it, it is the safest way for criminal organizations to drug traffic. And so that has not changed between administrations, because it actually has very little to do with immigration enforcement, actually, in terms of the volume.
Vivian, thank you. Hopefully you guys are popping questions into the QR code, and Jane, I don't know if you've got a tally of those. Do we have a lot of questions? Okay. So we want to make time for that. So let us maybe, we'll do one more question, and then, which is unfortunate, because are you guys enjoying this? Yeah, I mean, super informative, right? Of just what's happening on the ground. Let's just take a minute and maybe do these one at a time. Who could speak briefly? We hear a lot about, illegals and illegal immigration, and, we're just after criminals, and we're just, trying to secure the border. And but we've talked about pathways to citizenship, right? There are lots of legal pathways to earn citizenship as a right. It's a gift. And there's pathways to that. What's somebody maybe speak to the difference between what's legal immigration, what's illegal immigration? I guess that's a fog, I think, for a lot of people. Christina, you're smiling. You like that one, or do you want to give it to Carolyn?
No, I mean, I like Carolyn to talk about it, but let me do it.
Great.
I'll
We got to be. This is our rapid fire round.
Okay,
So
all right.
stay with
So,
it.
legal immigration. So when you're thinking about when people think legal immigration, they're thinking there is already a pipeline and there's a path, and you just need to walk down the path. When people think illegal immigration, they're thinking about the people that show up at the border and they try to barge their way in, and they try to suck up our tax resources. The only things that we are ethically allowed to do is legal immigration, just so you know. We are not allowed to ethically represent people who are trying to come in illegally. I think the misconception about illegal immigration is that, again, civics, right after World War II, the world decided, or everybody that signed on to the UN Convention Against Torture decided that should the Holocaust happen again, there should be a way for people who are in the position of the Jews at the time to run to a third country because their own country's government was persecuting them. So the U.S. was actually fairly late to kind of adopt asylum laws and policies. I think it took us, I think the UN Convention Against Torture was drafted somewhere in the 50s. We didn't really implement that until the 1980, I want to say. But essentially, that's the heart behind what we, I think, conceptualize as illegal immigration. So the people that are showing up at the border, the people who are coming in with a student visa but actually trying to escape their home country, like a lot of the Burmese clients that we have, what they're relying upon is international goodwill and this idea that if something crazy is happening in your home country, then there should be a way for me to not be persecuted by my own government. So, hand it to Caroline.
I'll go a different route. So I think one thing that's really mind-blowing to a lot of people is, to dovetail on one thing that Christina said, there's not some line and the people who are illegals are cutting the line. There's only certain pathways. You saw there's 4, and actually diversity lottery is out right now, so you got 3. So there's really limited circumstances to get in line for a green card or a citizenship. So that's point number 1. And I think our sense of justice, we don't like people cutting in line in front of us, right? We don't like that. So it's very understandable to me why people latch on to this illegal concept. Like, wait your turn, do it the right way. Also, to dovetail, throughout our country's history, we've always had these amnesty programs that have run, that have kind of allowed people some forgiveness and some grace for, maybe they entered without inspection, but they have grown a family here, no criminal convictions. And we've, through our history, had these different kind of legalizations. And unfortunately, we're very overdue for that. So the last one was it was in the 80s. And so that's why we kind of have this burning desire for these illegal people to get out. But truthfully, most of the people who legalized kind of were in that same category until our country said, wait, this kind of makes sense. These people were escaping something. So that's one point. And the second point that I think is important is the erosion of legal pathways since 2025. I don't know if any of you know, but temporary protective status was one of the most robust ways for humanitarian aid. It's when you have an earthquake, a regime change. It's supposed to be a temporary status, yes, but generally speaking, what happens is people come over from Ukraine, Burma, wherever they're coming from on this temporary protected status. And what we're seeing in this current climate is the erosion of that. So you're here and you've been here, I don't know, 5 years, 6 years, you have a family, your kids are in school, and you had this temporary status that was renewable every 2 years, and all of a sudden it's gone. And in 10 days, you get a notice that says you need to leave within 30 days. And I don't know that that is the best methodology for our country when we have immigrants who've started businesses in that time, et cetera. So what I think is one of the most shocking things is people who had a legal status. They came in legally. They had a legal status. We're seeing this pulling back. And like I said about the green card clients, people who have legal pathways, we're making that more difficult. So we're kind of turning people into illegals, right? We're kind of creating a bigger pool to get angry at. And that is what is really shocking to me, is that TPS is a great example. I mean, how many TPS countries are there anymore? I mean, everything's in litigation. And so we just are seeing this erosion. And like the refugees, all those people who are vetted on the outside, the difference between a refugee and asylum, refugees are outside of our country and brought over through some resettlement. Asylees are people who come in and then apply for asylum. So all those people, our current law is being interpreted that those people can be re-vetted. I'll tell you, the last refugee clients I helped were in a refugee camp for 12 years with their 7 children. They spent a long time waiting in line for this country to come in legally. So the idea to take that and make them illegal all of a sudden, after all that their family has gone through to do it the right way, that's the thing that I think, if you leave with anything to me, like, look into that. Look into what it is to get, become a refugee. It's not such an easy process. So if we're attacking these legal pathways, and like in Minneapolis, we're detaining people and re-vetting them and their whole family, that to me is not, I don't think that's what most people are looking for when they say illegal, is to kind of erode people who already had some legal status. So that's a huge change, and that's, something to evaluate.
No, that's great.
I just want to add, the immigration judge said that she doesn't want to follow federal judge for the release because that federal judge is nobody. She's following direct orders from her higher ups, and that is for
No, thank you.
our local immigration.
Yes. So we've got a lot of great questions. Let's segue some of this. And Vivian, I'll give you the chance to go first on this one if you want. But as a kind of a good follow-up to what you, Christina and Carolyn, what you just shared, Anonymous asks, how can we continue to advocate and take tangible action steps for our neighbors? So what can we do, practically, in the face of these policies that have shut down opportunities for resettlement, this huge policy shift that's so changed the landscape? What are there some any practical things we can do, right? Because most of us here are not practicing attorneys. We're not, writing habeas petitions suing Pam Bondi. So as much as you might like to, it's okay. I'm not going to ask for a show of hands on that. But again, Vivian, through the organizations you help and some of the things you lead, are there some ways that people can, what are some things that people can do?
I think Caroline's going to have a great answer to this question with pathways, and I guess what one very, it's not easy, but it's, in my mind, I think it's critical, is have conversations with people in other rooms like these, or in your churches, or in your small groups, and help them understand what's happening. These times are crazy. Even when we were thinking about how to phrase the questions, we were trying to be very sensitive to the fact that not everyone is alarmed by what's happening, right? And yet it's critical that we are open-handed and gracious with people who maybe don't know the full picture. You know, having worked with law enforcement, including ICE agents, you know, hand in hand to enforce the law, I understand that there are many people out there who are acting on a good faith and maybe only partial picture of what is happening. And so I would just encourage you all to humbly invite those conversations. And then in terms of something very tangible, you know, to go back to this idea of civil and legal. I'm going to call out again my colleague Maithili and the Afghan Refugee Empowerment Fund. What I think is really powerful is that Afghans walked alongside our military personnel at great personal risk to themselves, their safety, their family's safety, and were made promises by our government. Let our yes be yes and our no be no, in the sense that they are now in a position where they feel abandoned, and rightfully so. And so what I would encourage is for us to, you know, these are a segment of the refugee community that really not only did everything correctly, they sacrificed a great deal, and many of them face death if they're returned to their country. And so find ways to see the image of God in them, even though they come from a culture and a faith that's very different from ours. I think it's one way, not only for us to be a great witness, but for our word and for the safety of our military and future operations. If we cannot maintain our word, then it puts our country at risk in so many different ways. And so I would just really encourage everyone to get to know the situation of the Afghan refugees in our community.
Oh, amen. No, and Jane's going to have some opportunities at the end about ways to participate and ways you can get involved. You don't have to have gone to law school or even taken the Kim Kardashian route to the bar to have an impact here. Let's go another direction. We'll, again, try to get some of these in before we run out of time. And maybe Caroline or Christina, whoever feels, maybe not actual numbers, but here's another question from Anonymous. How many clients have you successfully freed? So what are you seeing these days with all these habeas petitions that are going up all the time, you know, every week? How many, maybe even percentage, like how many are 100%. Getting people out? How many individuals remain in detention centers? And have you encountered, are dreamers at risk? You know, we've heard about dreamers, this whole group that was born here. I mean, are they even potentially at risk from these things? So you guys can split that up, or one of you can take it if you want to run.
Okay, so I'll talk about the Dreamers. In case you don't know who they are people that during the Obama administration in 2012, that administration decided that we shouldn't be punishing children for being brought over by their parents. And so when you look at the acronym DACA, the D and the A stand for deferred action on childhood arrival. So what that means is that these children are acknowledging that they are deportable. And they are just asking the federal government to defer that deportation action. Since 2012, the DACA program has come under so much challenge. So it's been, I think a lot of efforts have been made to try to get it dismantled. At the moment, because there is so much else going on, DACA, I'm not going to say that DACA is safe, but DACA isn't really the priority at the moment because, there's different TPS countries. TPS is ending as a program, and the federal government is getting a lot of pushback for that. Also, DACA has a criminal background check requirement, and so you couldn't get your DACA renewed if you have disqualifying criminal history. So for the most part, I'm going to say DACA is not being focused on right now because there are a lot of DACA recipients that now are in their 30s, 40s, I want to say, who are positively contributing to our tax pool. They are gainfully employed. They have work permits. So for the most part, I don't think DACA is under fire right now.
And just a side note, I do have 2 people who got put into detention with DACA. So I will say that is all true and correct, but these things are happening, and I think that's what kind of happens when, like Vivian was saying, there's not a priorities. Just like, hey, you're on deferred action, let's just take you on into OTAI. So I think that part is a challenge. So it's not like, I think there's a lot of fear because you hear these things as a community member and you think, I have DACA, so there's a lot of fear around that still. But I think, yes, as a general rule, we've been able to get those people safely out of detention. And you asked the question about how many people we get out and how many people are still in. I actually just had my, I think it was my 9th client released from custody on last Thursday, the 9th successful habeas out of 9, so that's great. And I have a bond hearing pursuant to habeas tomorrow morning, so you can all pray for me. I'm really hoping I'm going 10 for 10. But many people remain detained, particularly I get somehow my cell phone number is circulating around not only OTAI, but now also California City, where I had one of my other clients moved, for desperate calls for habeas petitions. And as we mentioned, I just wanted to highlight a couple things about being in detention. There was a detainee that's in there that went on a hunger strike, and that's been very much highlighting this mental health issue. I have my client who, like I said, has been in his daily disposable contacts for 3 weeks because he can't be given his glasses. So I've have been working with ICE, and like to Vivian's point, it's not like all these people are evil people, and I don't want to propagate that. I think most people are trying to work within the system, and the system is a little bit overloaded. So I think kindness goes a long way in dealing with these things. But that I have another. And to your point about access, most of the clients I have that are detained do not speak a language that I speak. They speak Somali, they speak Dari, and all sorts of languages that I don't have capabilities in. So that is a real challenge when you're trying to put forth a legal defense, right? And I've had a lot of trouble getting my translators admitted to OTAI and get them cleared. So we're using a lot of bandwidth just to get the basics done. So to Christina's point, the people who do remain detained, it's quite challenging to get their case properly done. So that there are still quite a few people, and I know we were going to touch on this question, so I'm just going to quickly say, to the criminal, people always ask, aren't there a bunch of criminals in that place? So they, just like a prison or a jail, you wear a jumpsuit in detention, and your color determines your background. So if you have a blue jumpsuit, you have no criminal record. So I have only represented people in blue jumpsuits, and I would say when I go into the court, and orange is if you have, some criminal charge, like a DUI or something pending. And then it goes up from there, I guess, to red is like a violent. I've actually never seen someone in a red jumpsuit at OTAI, never. And I've been in there quite a bit in the courtrooms and such. But the point is the magnitude of criminals in that context is not high from my personal observation. And I believe there's some statistics that actually Jane looked up that kind of show you that. I think it's like 86% of the people have no criminal conviction that are detained, not just at OTAI, but nationwide. So, so we've continued to have a lot of challenges for the people who are detained, I think is probably the spirit of that question. But many people, I think the federal judges in San Diego are not happy about the way that the process is being carried out. So thankfully, we have them as advocates to go and argue our case. But to Christina's point, I'm not a federal lawyer, but now I am, so here we go.
Carolyn, thank you. So last question, and again, we're going to be around afterwards, so there's time for follow-up. And I want to try to combine maybe an open-ended question for each of you. Vivian, we'll start with you. And if you can tie it together with one more question from our audience. Let me ask you this. From your perspective, your experience, what are your hopes for the system? How would you like to see it changed? And maybe the question that comes from the audience is, how can we affect change in this current environment? So what would you like to see changed, and is there anything they can do to kind of bring that along? And we'll start with you, Vivian, we'll go to Carolyn, and we'll finish with Christina.
Such great questions. I'll start with the second, the second one, because it bleeds into my answer to the first. And again, I saw it in the courtrooms, and I saw it in church discussions and in the community, and relationship is the way to affect real change. It has to start with creating credibility and trust with people who maybe vehemently disagree with us. And it's incredibly humbling. It's incredibly humbling. Requires swallowing a lot of my own pride and judgment, thinking, well, I did this, so I know, right? But I realized that those were barriers to God's will, especially in the church, to see us drawn to Him and to see the world drawn to how beautifully we represent Christ, I think requires us to go back to relating to one another again in a way that is humble and compassionate. And for me, that challenge constantly is to see those who disagree with me again as people who are created in God's image, who are maybe doing their best to follow Christ, and so am I. And so one big shift for me was to stop thinking of a certain group of people, well, they think this and they believe this, but certainly in the church, it's we, right? And so, we maybe have lost our way when it comes to how we treat the foreigner. We perhaps have a need to see more clearly God's heart here, and not, well, they do, I've got it, And I do think that will be incredibly winsome and appealing to not just people within the church, but to those who are watching what we do, because they are absolutely watching. And I want Christ's name to be glorified and magnified, and not viewed as bigoted or limited or narrow. So there's that, and that's a very personal thing, that the way that everyone does that will be different. My hope is that we are in this room, and that's awesome. That gives me so much hope. We are in conversation, and not everyone in this room agrees with each other, right? And that's a beautiful thing. And so that gives me a lot of hope. What I hope to see is, from a policies perspective, is, like I've mentioned, wise stewardship. Even if I think we can all agree that resources should be used with discernment, power should be wielded with discernment. It can be a great tool for justice and for implementing God's vision of a just and righteous world that is, organized by law and order. However, the way in which we do that requires discernment. It cannot be sort of in a quality or quantity over quantity manner. And so my hope is that we become wise stewards of the incredible privilege and power that we have in this country, and for our government to adopt that same kind of discernment.
Thank you, Vivian. That's beautiful.
So what's up,
Caroline?
hope, right?
Yeah.
I mean, one
your
thing I
hope?
want to, the coolest thing that's happened to me in these contexts is these people in detention just saying, you coming here brought me hope. Me being out there. And so I think that just tells us something about where people's hearts are at, right? They're so fertile for us to pour into. And I think we're kind of actually in an amazing time as Christians to pour into people when they're in detention, when they're out, when we're pouring into their lives here, building small businesses, English classes, helping with tutoring of their children. We are, when we're showing up, we're really showing the foreigner who we are. And that makes them want to be a part of something. I have a really hopeful, beautiful story. I had a woman come, and she is an asylum seeker from Iran. She was persecuted, tortured, and other things for her progressive beliefs that women shouldn't have to wear hijabs. She was imprisoned in Iran. She had many terrible things happen to her on her journey. She was an atheist. She was angry. And we, through our time together, she is now a Christian. And I am not, certainly not in charge of that. And that is not what I did in her, but God used this terrible experience she's been through to show her something. And that is what he does, right? He makes beautiful things out of terrible, terrible events. And so we have a choice in showing people that. And I think, if anything, we are able to provide hope to people. And this is for such a time as this, showing up and just empowering all of us to be ambassadors of peace, of justice, of loving mercy. And I think every Uber driver basically is an immigrant. Give them a talk next time you're in the car. They've got a lot of crazy things. They have a lot of fears. If you hire household employees, you are waiters, you're nannies, ask them how they're feeling. Send them to someone who's able to screen them for potential relief from immigration. I mean, just seeing people, just acknowledging what's the elephant in the room. People are scared, they're fearful. And I think we can bring hope. We don't have to have all the answers, just to be seen, to be known, to be loved. For these people who are being, like you said, I have a client who was an Afghan military commander, and he said, I feel horrible in this country. I feel like I'm hated. I feel like my family is at risk. I feel scared to be here. And he fought alongside our military for 5 years, wielding a gun, being an interpreter, going out. So we can bring this hopeful message back to this time. Because the circumstances aren't something I'm in control of or you are in control of, but what message we bring to people out in the world, they're all among us. We live in a big immigrant community. All among us are people who are starved to be known, seen, and loved. And so that, I hope, we can all do without needing to know whether they have status or not, without all the particulars.
I'm going to go a little nerdy because that's who I am. I think that my first introduction to what is the heart of the God of the Bible towards the alien, the sojourner, the foreigner, was through a World Relief Bible study. So they have these bookmarks, and it's 40 days of how God feels about immigrants. And it gives you all the verses that you can look up, and I loved doing that. I loved seeing across the entire Bible that there's this consistency when it comes to how God feels about immigrants. So if you want to do that, Jane can give you a bookmark. I think the second thing is I totally agree. I feel like it just mic drop right now. I don't need to say anything else. I'm going to put a little asterisk on the loving your neighbor piece of things. You all know that we have midterm elections coming up this year. And I've been thinking for a while, I'm looking at Zeb because he's an elder at our church. I've been thinking for a while about potentially doing some sort of study that would help us get to God's intent for, like Vivian was saying, discerning resource allocation. And I'm sure those words are not in the Bible, but the idea that we would love our neighbor so far as to vote in a way that, as to the best of our ability, puts their interests above our own, right? This is Philippians 2:3. And then if you don't know the name of your congressional representative, this is the year. So just seeing in your congressional district, who's representing you and how do they feel about immigration? And then beginning to kind of look at what might be some ballot measures, like what are some of the things, what are some directions that Congress is taking things. One of the things that has been really, I think when we as legal practitioners, when we freak out about like policies being handed down, is when we feel like the letter of the law is being prioritized over the spirit of the law. When you're just kind of like really nitpicking at like that one little word in this one statute, and that's giving you license to do whatever the heck you want with your policy, I think that's where like I feel the most personal offense, because it's so clear that you're just relying on that verb tense to allow you to treat people in a way that is dehumanizing. What I would love to do with people who are not Jesus followers is to talk about congressional intent, right? And I'm not going to use that word in the conversation. But like if we can just say, okay, what was this piece of legislation? What is this law aiming to do? What is it actually doing? I feel like would be a really cool conversation that I would like to have. Among Jesus followers, then I think instead of congressional intent, I would love to have that conversation about midterm elections, about God's intent. What was the intent behind how he set up the nation of Israel when he legislated in the Torah how he wanted society to function, and how can we apply our understanding of that heart, probably imperfectly, but to ballot measures, to policy, and then to maybe writing your congressional representatives a letter to say, hey, this is how I feel about this, and as my representative, I'm going to expect you to care about my point of view.
Beautiful. Well, we are sadly out of time for the panels. Can we thank our panel tonight? Let me just, I had a 15-minute sermon prepared, but let me just try to bring this back to closure and to the heart of the Father. I think, again, ladies, thank you. Again, and Jane, thank you. Amazing panel. Just what you promised with the flyer for this, right? Just a very informative, current, understanding, boots on the ground kind of understanding of what's happening in our city, in our community, and obviously extrapolate this across our nation. But I think a couple things I want to emphasize, and I'll turn over to Jane. She's got some action points and things to wrap up with. Number one, and this is just going to affirm some things that our panelists shared. For those of us that are followers of Jesus, we want, number one, I think we need to be humble, right? I mean, it doesn't do us any good to be arguing with each other and casting stones at each other. And I think, Vivian, you made the point eloquently, like, look, people have lots of different views on this, some informed, some uninformed. We tend to think of ourselves always as the most informed. That's how we see ourselves. That's part of our, right? Jeremiah said, look, your heart is deceitful above all things and desperately wicked. That's true for all of us. So I think just a big dose of humility to approach this is a great place to start for all of us, and recognizing, again, that God wants to do a work through his church. Like Jane said to start with, God has always used the church, whether it's globally, whether it's here in San Diego. The church has always been his instrument to reveal himself to the world. So we've got to be patient with each other, and even we talked about relationship. I think you said, Vivian, taking time to hear other people's stories. Not just the stories of but starting with fellow believers, like, well, where are you coming from? And really trying to be willing to just listen, even if it's radically different from kind of where I'm coming from. Let's see if there isn't a way for, we have unity in God. And so giving that space is important. I think then as we think about, just how we can approach the refugee community and how we can be part of this, that's what brought a lot of us here tonight, right? I think there's lots of ways to get involved. Jane's got some more of that, but let me just encourage all of us, right? I think here's the thing, and this is where we all can unite, even people that don't see eye to eye with us. They think maybe they're wherever we are, or they think they're on the other side of this issue, right? I mean, I think God's heart is for the refugee, for displaced people, right? Because our entire story is a story of displaced people. That's the story of the gospel, right? You can go all the way back to the beginning, right? Adam and Eve were the first displaced people. They were kicked out of the garden, sent into the wilderness. Economically, socially, politically, they had to fend for themselves in ways that they were never designed. It wasn't God's intent, it wasn't his plan, but brokenness has entered into the world, and that brokenness called sin is what's behind everybody that's displaced, marginalized, overlooked, brutalized, taken advantage of. That's underneath all of it. And God isn't okay with that. He is a God of justice. He is going to right the scales eventually, finally, one day, right? But even now, we can see ourselves as part of that story. And again, it continues all the way through Scripture, right? And so fast forward through Abraham, Jacob, Joseph, David. These are all people that spent time as displaced in foreign places, in circumstances. Even, in fact, if you think about it, even Joseph and Mary and Jesus himself were displaced in Egypt, right? They're running from Herod, right? So imagine Joseph and Mary, little baby Jesus, maybe 2-3 years old, right? He's in Egypt. Think about, there had to be a community there of foreign people that weren't Jewish like them, that had to give Joseph some carpentry work, had to help Mary find the local food store, had to understand that was all part of his story. And there's a way in which I think, this is what unites us even as followers of Jesus, and beyond that, it unites us as human beings, right? There's a sense, because we're all descended from Adam and Eve, there's a sense in which we all carry that, we have something in us tells us that we're displaced, that we've been cast out, that we're not, this isn't home, right? Somehow we carry that as image bearers of God. And so just remembering that and approaching this issue, approaching the opportunities from that perspective, saying, hey, let us just carry that humility, that sensitivity into everything we try to touch here. Whatever God would, back to where we started the journey from some of our panelists, right? Like, how did you end up here? I have no idea. I was available, and here I am, right? And that's true for all of us tonight. We're available, here we are. Let's say, Lord, here we are. Where do you want to send us? Where do you want to use us, Lord? We're available. Just direct our steps, and we will be your hands and feet to reveal you to a broken world that there is hope. There is hope in Jesus Christ. There is hope in his family. We're the people that will go where no one else will go. We're the people that will serve when no one else will serve. We're the people that will love where people will turn their back. Let that be us tonight. Amen? And let me turn it over to Jane.
Thank you. In the midst of what really is such a difficult topic and a divisive topic and a divisive time in the church, I am so deeply encouraged by all of the people that are in this room and actually all the churches that are represented. We didn't know who was going to come. We were like, it could just be the 5 of us. Who knows? We'll record it so we can share it, So I'm just encouraged because it's for such a time as this, that God has brought each of you guys here for a purpose. So I thank you guys for that. I want to point you guys to the screen. We've got a QR code, and when you scan it, it'll bring you to our calls to action. I really believe we can't do everything, but we can each do something. So I want you guys to really prayerfully consider, what is that something that God's calling you to do? On this call to action sheet, you'll find prayer points, you'll find books, Bible studies, resources to learn more. And you'll also find opportunities to volunteer. So volunteering with Love Does as a mobile pantry volunteer, or doing a food donation drive at your church, because actually April 1st, refugees and people that do not have green cards are going to lose their food benefits. So this is a significant thing that you can do to stand in the gap. You can also become an immigration legal volunteer with Pathways to Citizenship, with World Relief, or you can become a conversational English partner through our Cafe English program for World Relief. You can also donate to nonprofits that are represented here. You're going to see some of them in the lobby over there. You can host a community garage sale. We had a volunteer that did that and raised $10,000 because people in their neighborhood just started dropping stuff off, and they were like, sell it, sell it. And there was somebody that matched it. So you never know what God can do. Just be creative with what God's put in your hands. And then if you want to use your voice and join World Relief in our advocacy efforts, there is a way for you to sign up at the table as well, okay? I want to close now with a closing prayer. I'm so grateful for each of you that are present here tonight. And I really feel like it'd be appropriate for us to end this time with a closing prayer and a blessing. So before I read this blessing, I want to invite you guys to close your eyes and bring to mind those that you personally know that are impacted by policies, that are serving on the front lines, like these women that were on the panel. People that have influence, that can advocate for policy reform. Think about the immigrants that you know from your church, from your neighborhood, from your workplace, from the schools that your kids attend. Think about DHS officers. Think about judges and attorneys that are representing immigrants. Think about the nonprofits that are on the front lines serving immigrants. Think about your pastor. Think about the church in America and elected officials that have been entrusted with authority to change policy. So I'm going to read now from Numbers 6:24 through 26. The Lord bless you and keep you. The Lord make his face shine on you and be gracious to you. The Lord turn his face towards you. Jesus, this is our prayer for each group that I just mentioned. This is a blessing for all of the precious men and women and families that bear your image, that are serving in all of these different ways. Would you bless them with this blessing? In Jesus' name, amen.